And so I always say to my clients, if you have a thought with the word should, where, you're really referencing other people, that's the formula for frustration, right? Like they should be doing this, but they're not. Like,
Yeah.
how else are you going to feel? You're not going to be excited or happy. There's nothing positive coming out of that. So, just to notice that. I think the other thing is sometimes it's not even about those people, but it's subconsciously other people are reminding us of a person from our past, right? And we don't always connect the dots, but I see this sometimes even with my daughter, who reminds me of my sister. Right. And so growing up,
Exactly.
my sister and I would fight all the time, and there were very different personality styles. And so now my daughter is very different from me, very similar to my sister. And so it kind of brings me back. Right. And I have to catch myself and be like, okay, I'm getting triggered and I need to take care of that and make sure that I don't react. So sometimes it's not even the person in front of you, but like the association that your brain makes
Yeah.
of that person's behavior or demeanor or something about them.
Yeah, it's a real physical neural pathway that was built in your early experience, and we all use the pathways we have because that's how the brain works. You're making me think of something it's so central in my mind when you talked about the victim mindset.
Yeah.
Maybe related to that is the martyr mindset, or you could even call it the hero or rescuer mindset. So many people may think, oh, I'm not a victim, I'm a powerful hero, but I'm so angry at everybody else because they're not doing their share.
Yeah.
So it ends up with the same cycle of resentment, and it's effectively victimhood because you see yourself as a victim. But people don't see that because they think I'm the superhero that's doing more than my share and nobody else is doing it right.
Yeah. And I see that a lot with people pleasers where they're like, I really enjoy helping other people and boosting them up, and I help them with their career and I do all these things for them. But secretly, they're waiting for reciprocation. They're waiting for the thank you to
Yes.
arrive. They're waiting for the appreciation. And when that doesn't come, because, sometimes people just forget, sometimes people are just narcissistic. There could be a whole bunch of different explanations for why it doesn't come, or it doesn't come in a format that they imagined, and maybe it's not good enough for their version, whatever it is, right? They end up feeling resentful, and that really is that victim mentality, that victim statehood, where you're like, how come I do this and nobody does what I need? Nobody's like paying attention to me. I'm not getting my needs met. And then why should I even bother?
Yes.
I don't need to help anybody. Like, screw everybody. Let them fall off the cliff. Like, I'm not going to stop it anymore. Right. So we get into that really kind of cynical, bitter place. And then when you take a step back, you're like, that's not the person I want to be. And that's not who I really am. I'm the person who really loves people and I love helping. But that's really burnout speaking. That's
Good,
what that
good.
is.
So let's talk about your method for approaching this.
Well, one of the things that I think is really important before we dive into burnout solutions is, I mean, obviously, number one is you want to identify whether you really are burned out. And so, for that purpose, I do a couple of things. One is I come on shows like this and I talk about what burnout really is so that people can start to identify it in themselves. But two, I've also created a burnout checklist so that people can download the document, really kind of go through the check boxes, figure out what's going on for them, because burnout also shows up very differently for everyone. So what's what is it looking like for you? And then based on that, what do you need to focus on? Um, and then the other thing, other than just identifying that you are burned out, is figuring out what version, like how's burnout showing up for you? Because then if you understand that piece, then you can create a customized recovery solution. And like I say, burnout is not a one size fits all, right? So not only does it show up differently for everyone, but your way out of burnout has to really relate back to the way that it's showing up.
Okay. So,
right? So
mm,
so the way that I've kind of done this is basically said, okay, we have 3 different burnout profiles. And you might actually find yourself in more than one of these, but it's a way to kind of start the conversation and really start to think about what's really going on for me that maybe comes from me. These are the things that I have control over that contribute to my burnout, that then based on that informs my recovery strategy. So the way I kind of break this down is you're either a thinker, a feeler, or a doer.
mhm.
All right. So thinkers are people who are very much in their heads. So the kinds of things that they struggle with are over analyzing everything, which makes it hard to make a decision. So they waste a lot of time. They're kind of regurgitating the information in their head. And the same thing happens when they've experienced some sort of event. Maybe they've had a conversation with someone, they were at a meeting, or something's happened, and now there's a lot of rumination going on. So you're kind of stuck in this endless loop. They might have a lot of critical self-talk. They have a lot of anxiety. These are people who may struggle with perfectionism, procrastination, imposter syndrome. Now, you don't have to have all of these things, but if you have any of these things, chances are you're a thinker because you're really stuck in your head. And so, just to know that about yourself will then inform what you really would most benefit focusing on. Now, imagine if we said, the solution for everyone is, just go on vacation, which is what we hear a lot about in the media. Now, if you're that thinker and you go on vacation, but then you come back to work, maybe you've been able to recharge a little bit, but your brain is still working the same way that it was before. And
Not to
so
mention, probably during the vacation, you were busy analyzing it.
exactly. And so it's really important to see that, and then based on that, create something that actually changes the way that you engage, as opposed to just continuing to go about things in the same way you always had.
And what are
So
the other two types?
yeah. So the second one is the feeler. And those are people who are your classical people pleasers. So they're very emotional. They care very much about other people. They're the ones that don't have a lot of good boundaries. It's hard for them to say no. So they end up taking on too much. They become really overwhelmed. And they're always waiting for that reciprocation, as we said, or the appreciation to show up. And when it doesn't, they become really resentful, right? And so that's kind of their version of burnout, is they're overloaded, they're overwhelmed, and then they're resentful.
And the
So obviously
solution for them is what?
is boundary setting,
Okay.
right? Really learning, like, where do I end and you begin? And how can I say no without the guilt? Because a lot of the reason they have trouble with boundaries in the first place is because they really believe that they're not as important as other people. They're seeking external validation instead of validating themselves from the inside, right? And so they're stuck in this paradigm. And again, it ends up being that kind of victim mentality because, hey, I'm helping everybody. And here I am. And it's like this thankless world that I live in,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And we don't want people giving all their resources away and then ending up empty, right? You want to be able to be in a sustainable model where you have fuel to keep going.
Yes.
So that's clearly like what's going on there.
And the
And
third
then
one is the doer.
the doer, yes. And with the doers, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but what we see is people who take on way too much. So while the thinker is really focused on quality, right? Those are like your perfectionists. They want things to be exact. They don't want to make mistakes. The doers are focused on quantity, and it's like, I need to get more done. And really what's driving them is this belief that they are not good enough. And so or they're just not enough. They're just not enough. And so they need to compensate by doing a lot, right? And so there's this hamster wheel that they get into where they're always taking on more things and more things, and not, and you talk about realistic expectations, that doesn't exist. They're not thinking, well, given the time that I have, this is what I can take on. And if something shows up, then they say, you know what, I can't do that right now, or I can't do that at all, or whatever. It's like, yes, let's pile more on because I have something that I need to prove. And essentially, what it is that their self worth is very much tied to their productivity.
Yes. Yes.
So when they accomplish something, they have that feather in their cap. And it's kind of like, the classic, when I X, then I'll feel happy. So for some people, it's like, when I make $1 million, then I'll be happy. Or when I get married, then I'll be happy. And when I have kids, then I'll be happy. Right. So we have these conditions on our happiness. And so for them, it's like, when I finish this and do that and accomplish this, then I'll be happy. And one thing that I think is important to recognize is that they're really confounding these two different topics, happiness and accomplishment. They're not the same.
Yeah.